Wyoming Territory, August 1877. The wind screamed off the edge of the Medicine Bow Cliffs, dry and sharp like it had teeth. Elira Oakes clung to the rock face, her fingers scraped raw, her skirts snapping around her legs like a whip. One boot had slipped, now wedged against a narrow outcrop no wider than a child's hand. Below her, the gorge dropped hundreds of feet into a tangle of stone and pine. She did not look down again. "Hold on," a voice called above her. She dared to shift her eyes upward. A man leaned over the ridge, one hand braced on the dirt, the other reaching down. The sun caught the edge of his jaw, dusted with stubble, and the brim of his weather-worn hat shadowed eyes that did not flinch. "I've got you," he said, voice steady as the ground she longed for. She hesitated just a breath, then reached up, his fingers locked around her wrist, strong and warm. In one hard pull he hauled her upward, her boots scrambling against the cliff wall. She tumbled into his chest, shaking, heart hammering against bone. His arms wrapped around her without thought, holding her steady as she gasped for breath. "Easy now," he said close to her ear. She pulled back just enough to see his face. His hair was dark and wind-tangled, and a white scar curved beneath his left eye like a half-moon. He was not young, maybe 30, maybe more, but his voice held a calm that made her feel like the world wasn't crumbling beneath her feet. "I thought I was going to die," she whispered. "You are not dying today," he said, brushing a strand of her hair from her face. Elira blinked hard. "Thank you," he nodded once. "Name's Calden Zane." "Elira Oakes." He helped her stand. Her legs wobbled, but he kept an arm around her waist until she steadied. Dust clung to her dress, and her palms were streaked with blood from the climb. "What were you doing out here alone?" he asked. "I was not alone. My horse spooked. I got thrown. My bag, my canteen, everything went over," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the cliff. "I tried to follow the trail back, got turned around. You are lucky I was riding this way," he said, glancing toward the narrow path behind them. "This ridge is no place for wandering." "I noticed," she muttered. A small smile tugged at the edge of his mouth, but he did not say more. Instead, he led her away from the edge, guiding her back to his horse tethered beneath a gnarled pine. He helped her into the saddle, then swung up behind her. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "North," she said, "toward Elk Bend. My brother's homestead is a day's ride from there." "You will not make it on foot. You are coming with me." She turned slightly. "You do not even know me." He met her eyes. "I know what would have happened if I had not been here. That is enough." They rode through the afternoon, the wind easing as they dropped into the valley. The scent of pine and warm dirt filled the air, and the sun sank slow behind the hills. Calden's horse moved steady beneath them, and Elira leaned back just a little, her body aching but her mind finally quiet. They stopped before dusk at a small camp nestled by a stream. Calden set about building a fire while Elira knelt at the water, rinsing her hands and face. "You live out here?" she asked when she returned. "Sometimes. I run cattle for a man out of Laramie, but I like the quiet better than town." He handed her a tin cup of coffee. "What about you?" "I came west to help my brother. He and his wife just had a baby. I was supposed to be there last week. I took the wrong trail after Fort Halleck." He lifted an eyebrow. "You are nearly 2 days off course." "I figured that out." They sat in the firelight, the quiet stretching between them. Elira watched the flames dance and felt the weight of the day settle in her bones. Across the fire, Calden sat with his hat tipped back, eyes on the stars just beginning to show. "You saved my life," she said. He looked at her then, really looked. "You did not give up, I just helped." Her chest tightened, not with fear this time, but something quieter, something warm. They did not speak again that night, but when she lay down beneath his extra blanket, she watched him through the flicker of the flames. He sat awake a long time, silent and watchful, and for the first time in days she slept. Morning came soft and cold. Calden cooked bacon over the fire and handed her a plate without a word. After they ate, he packed the horse again and helped her up. They rode north, the trail winding through tall grass and cottonwoods. Around midday, they reached a fork in the land where a narrow wooden sign pointed toward Elk Bend. "You sure you are all right to go on?" he asked. "I can make it from here." He looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he nodded. Then he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. "My name's on there. If you wind up anywhere near Laramie or the ranch north of it, you come find me." Elira took the paper, her heart suddenly, inexplicably heavy. "Why? I do not usually stop for people," he said. "But I stopped for you." She held his gaze. "Calden, I know it has only been 2 days," he said, voice low, "but I felt something I have not in a long time." "So did I," she said before she could think to stop it. He reached for her hand, gave it a firm squeeze. "Then maybe this is not goodbye." She looked down at the note, then back up at him. "I hope not." He watched her ride off until the trees swallowed her up. That night, as he sat alone beside his fire, Calden Zane unfolded the note he had given her. On the back, in small, careful handwriting, he had written, "I will wait." And he meant it. The wind had shifted by early September, cooler now, with the scent of drying grass and distant smoke drifting down from the timber ridges. Calden Zane rode the southern fence line slow, checking for breaks where antelope had pushed through, his eyes scanning the horizon more than the wire. Each evening, when the sun dipped low and the air turned gold, he found himself listening for hoofbeats that never came. He didn't name the feeling, but it settled in his ribs and stayed. Near the corrals, a letter waited for him. Or rather, a folded paper tucked inside the palm of a boy from Elk Bend, who'd ridden half a day to deliver it. Calden read it once beneath the cottonwood by the barn, then again inside the bunkhouse, where the light was better. When he finally folded it and slid it into his coat pocket, his jaw had gone tight. 2 days later, he rode north. Elira stood behind the sod house, her skirts tied up around her knees, arms elbow-deep in soap suds at the washboard. Her brother's wife sat nearby with the baby, humming low over a needle and thread, while the child gurgled in the crook of her arm. The valley stretched wide and green around them, the distant hills softened by a pale haze. It was quiet work, and her hands had gone raw from the lie, but there was a peace in it she hadn't known she needed. "Miss Oakes," she turned at the voice, mouth parting. He stood just outside the fence, hat in hand, horse tied to a post. His shirt was travel-dusted, sleeves rolled to his forearms, and he looked like he'd ridden straight through without stopping. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward, barefoot in the dirt. "You came," she said, voice catching at the edge. "You asked me to." Her brother stepped out from the barn, eyes narrowed against the sun. "You know this man?" Calden looked to her, not answering on his own. Elira nodded. "He's the one who found me." Her brother studied him a moment longer, then gave a short nod and turned back to the barn. Calden waited until the door shut behind him. "You said you'd be here a week. That was 3. I stayed to help with the harvest, and the baby took sick." "He's better now," he nodded once. "That's good." She stepped closer, voice gentler now. "You didn't have to come, I know." "Then why did you?" He looked out toward the hills, the muscles in his jaw working. "Because I meant it." She folded her arms, watching him. "I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure you'd want me to. I wrote to you. I read it a dozen times." She looked down at her feet, then back up. "I missed you." He stepped forward, slow. "I didn't stop thinking about you." "Not once." She let out a breath, something loosening inside her chest. "I didn't fall just because the ground gave way." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers wrapping gently around hers. "I know." They stood there a long moment, the wind tugging soft at the corners of her apron, the scent of fresh bread drifting from the open window of the house. He didn't pull her close, not yet, but he didn't let go either. Behind them, the baby let out a sharp cry and Elira turned, instinctively pulling her hand from his. Her sister-in-law called out from the porch, "He's hungry again." "I should," Elira began. "I'll wait," Calden said. She glanced back, something unspoken in her eyes, then nodded and disappeared inside. An hour later, when the sun slipped lower and the shadows lengthened across the yard, she came out again, hair braided back, hands clean, a shawl around her shoulders. He was still there, seated on an overturned crate near the barn, watching the sky turn the color of copper. "Come walk with me," she said. They followed the edge of the field, boots brushing dried stalks, the silence easy now. She told him about the child's fever, the way the land still bore scars from the spring flooding, how her brother had nearly lost a mule to snakebite. He told her about a mare he'd helped deliver 3 nights ago, and a boy from town who'd nearly drowned crossing the creek too fast. "You've got a good hand with people," she said softly. "I do better with horses." She smiled but didn't laugh. "You do better than you think." When they reached the edge of the rise, she turned to face him. "I don't know what happens next. I do." Her throat tightened. "I'm not a woman who falls easy. I'm not a man who asks twice." She looked at him and saw it plain, no hesitation, no bluff, just something rooted deep like water beneath stone. "I'm not afraid of work," she said, "or staying. But I won't follow a man who disappears when it gets hard." He stepped in, close enough to feel his breath. "I don't run," she nodded slowly. "Then I think I want to see where this goes." He took her hand again, this time with both of his, warm and steady. The wind moved through the grass like a hush. They stood like that until the last of the light slipped behind the hills. When they walked back toward the house, her fingers stayed wrapped in his. The morning she left her brother's homestead, the frost was light across the grass, silvering the edges of every stalk and fallen apple. Calden stood beside the wagon, reins looped loosely in one hand, watching her say goodbye. She didn't linger over long, just a firm hug for her sister-in-law, a quiet word with her brother, a last glance at the baby bundled against the cold. Then she climbed up beside Calden and didn't look back. The trail south was slow, not from trouble, but because neither of them felt pressed. They stopped early each evening, made camp near streams or cottonwood groves, and rose late enough in the morning that the sun had already dried the dew. It wasn't laziness. It was something gentler, 2 people learning the rhythm of each other's company without rushing to name it. On the 5th evening, they made camp near a stand of juniper, where the land opened wide toward the distant snowy range. Calden gathered dry branches while Elira sorted through the last of the cornmeal. When the fire was built and their supper of griddle cakes was cooking, she set the skillet aside and dusted her hands. "You never said much about your people," she said, not as an accusation, but like a door swinging gently open. "My father was a freighter," Calden said, poking at the fire with a stick. "Ran wagons east to Cheyenne and west to Salt Lake, died in a rockslide before I turned 15. Mother passed the winter after. I worked cattle to eat. Been doing it since. No brothers or sisters, none that I know of," she nodded, eyes on the flames. "I used to think I needed a big family, a house full of voices." He glanced at her. "Changed your mind?" "I still want voices," she said, "but not if they're empty. I'd rather a quiet house with someone who listens." He looked at her then, really looked. "I listen." "I know," she said softly. They didn't speak again that night, but when the fire burned low and she lay wrapped in her blanket, she felt him settle a few feet away. Not touching, but near enough that she could hear his breath. She closed her eyes, and the ache she used to carry, the one that crept in whenever she thought too much about being alone, was blessedly absent. 3 days later, they rode into the land he called home. The cattle ranch sat north of Laramie, tucked against a rise of pine-dappled hills. The house wasn't grand, single-story, plank wood faded to sun gray, but the roof held and the porch didn't sag. A corral stretched behind the barn, where 2 geldings and a sway-backed mule picked at hay. Calden helped her down from the wagon and didn't let go of her hand. "You built this?" she asked. "Most of it," he said. "The barn was here. Everything else I added after." "What made you stop here?" "Land was cheap. Water runs clean. And no one bothers you unless you let them." She walked to the porch, ran her hand along the railing. "It's good land." He led her inside. The walls bore no paintings, no lace curtains or fine china shelves. But the floor was swept, the stove clean, and a line of dried herbs hung neat above the hearth. A quilt, worn but mended, lay folded across the end of the bed in the corner. "It's not much," he said. She turned, brows lifting. "It's everything." That afternoon she unpacked her satchel and hung her shawl by the door. He didn't ask her to stay. She didn't ask if she could. They both knew she already had. In the weeks that followed, they worked side by side. She mended saddle straps and boiled soap in the yard. He repaired the fence east of the creek and showed her how to read the sky for hail. Some evenings they sat on the porch steps, knees brushing, passing a tin cup of coffee between them. Others they said nothing at all, letting the silence settle like dust and knowing it didn't need to be filled. One night, after the cattle had been brought down from the higher pasture, she came in with her dress hem soaked and her braid falling loose. He stood at the stove, stirring beans, and when he turned to hand her a plate, she didn't take it. "I want to plant next spring," she said. "Squash, maybe beans. You've got good soil behind the barn." He set the plate down. "We'll make room." "You said you don't usually stop for people," she said, voice quieter. "I don't. But you stopped for me." "I didn't know why then," he said. "I do now." She stepped closer. "Tell me." "Because when I looked down that cliff and saw you clinging to the rock, I didn't see someone waiting to be saved. I saw someone still fighting." Her breath caught. "I was. And I wanted to be the man who reached down," he said. "Not just once. Always." She touched his face then, fingers brushing the line of his jaw, and for the first time he leaned into it. "I'm not afraid of being needed," she said, "but I want to be wanted too." "I want you," he said. "More than I've ever wanted anything that wasn't nailed to the land." She kissed him, slow and certain, like she'd been walking toward it since the moment he pulled her from the edge of the earth. Later, as they lay in the quiet dark, the wind brushing against the walls like a whisper, Elira rested her head against his chest. "You think this is what peace feels like?" she murmured. "No," Calden said. "I think this is what home feels like." And they didn't move. Not until the sun broke open the next morning, spilling light across the wide Wyoming sky. By October, their days were folded into routine, not dull but steady, the kind that settles into the bones and makes a place feel lived in. Elira rose before first light, tying her hair back with a strip of muslin, and stoked the stove while Calden checked the stock. They moved around each other easily, wordless when needed, light in speech when it suited. The weather had cooled, but the skies stayed clear, the kind of dry autumn that stretched on without warning before the snow came. One afternoon, after Elira had finished pressing apples for vinegar, she found Calden kneeling beside the west pasture gate, a length of chain in one hand, his brow drawn. "That hinge again?" she asked. He shook his head. "Gate's fine. Ground soft." "Too soft for this time of year." She crouched beside him, pressing her palm to the earth. "You think something's wrong beneath? Runoff might have undermined it, or a barrow. He stood, brushing his hands clean on his trousers. If it's deep, we'll need to shore it before the frost sets. I'll dig it with you in the morning. He looked at her sidelong. You're not expected to. I'm not here to be expected, she said. I'm here to be counted on. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something softer. He nodded once. That night, after the chores were done and the lantern trimmed low, she brought out a worn deck of playing cards she'd found tucked behind a drawer. You any good? She asked as she shuffled. I can hold my own, he said, settling across from her at the table. They played for an hour, mostly quiet, the only sound the flick of cards and the creak of the wind against the window. After she won 3 hands in a row, he leaned back and crossed his arms. You cheat, he said, not accusing, more amused. You just don't pay attention. I pay attention to what matters, she tilted her head. And what's that? He didn't answer right away. Then, the way you run your thumb over the edge of each card before you lay it down. Like you're weighing something that can't be changed. She set the deck aside. You see more than you let on. I listen better when I don't speak. She stood and crossed the room to where the kettle simmered. What about what you want? She asked, back still turned. Do you ever say it out loud? He rose slowly, boots quiet on the floorboards. I want you to stay through winter. She turned, kettle paused halfway to the cup. I thought I already had. I want you to stay because you choose to. Not because the trail's too long or the work's half done. She set the kettle down, crossed to him. Calden, I could take the wagon tomorrow if I wanted. I could head south and not look back. I know. But I don't want to. I want to see what the land looks like under snow. I want to hear how you curse when the ice cracks the pump. I want to learn how to keep a fire from dying overnight. He touched her cheek with the back of his fingers, gentle, careful. Then I'll teach you. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his. You're not the only one who means things. Outside, the wind swept through the trees, but inside, the warmth held. The next morning, they dug. The soil opened in clumps, damp and darker than it should have been. Around noon, Calden knelt and tapped the side of a hollow an old root had rotted out, leaving a pocket just beneath the surface. Could have collapsed under a wagon wheel, he said. Good thing you noticed. They filled it with stone and clay, tamped it firm, then packed fresh dirt over the top. When they finished, Calden leaned on the shovel and looked to where the hills folded into each other beyond the fence. You ever think about leaving Wyoming? Elira asked. I used to, when the winters got hard or the cattle didn't sell. But nowhere else felt like it had room for me. Feels like there's room for both of us here. He looked at her, the sun catching in his lashes, and nodded. It does. Later that week, they rode into Laramie for supplies, flour, lamp oil, new boots for Elira. She'd worn her old pair to near ruin, the soles letting in cold with every step. She picked out a pair sturdy enough for snow, plain but well-stitched, and when she paid, Calden didn't argue. Outside the mercantile, a woman called his name. She was older, with silver hair pinned in a twist and a ledger tucked under one arm. Calden Zane, she said. Didn't expect to see you in town before snowfall. I needed feed and a few other things, he said. Miss Oakes, this is Mrs. Haverly. She keeps the books for the cattle auctions. Mrs. Haverly's eyes warmed as she looked between them. It's good to see you with company, Mr. Zane. Long time since I've seen you walk beside anyone. Elira offered her hand. We share the work now. Mrs. Haverly nodded, satisfied. Well, that's the best kind of partnership there is. Back at the ranch, they loaded the goods into the storeroom, careful to stack the salt boxes where the mice couldn't reach. Afterward, Elira lit a lantern and stood near the table, her thumb smoothing the edge of one of the new boots. I've never stayed in one place this long without question, she said. You questioning now? She shook her head. I'm wondering how I ever thought I needed to keep searching. He crossed the room, took her hand. "You found something solid." "I did," she said. "And I'm not letting go." That night, as the first flakes of snow brushed the roof, they sat close by the hearth, the fire crackling low. Calden reached for her hand, and she laced her fingers through his without hesitation. Outside, the wind whispered along the eaves, but inside the house, there was no doubt. Only the quiet certainty of two people who had chosen the same life and meant to build it, season by season, side by side. The first true snow came in late November, quiet and deliberate, falling for 2 full days without break. By the end of it, the whole basin lay hushed under a white that softened every edge. The fields were buried, and the barn roof wore a thick cap that Calden had to rake clean before it buckled. Inside the house, the wood stove glowed steady, and Elira kept a kettle of beans simmering low with a sprig of dried sage she'd tied with string months before. On the second morning, Calden came in from checking the stock, his coat stiff with damp and his beard kissed with frost. He leaned near the stove, pulling off his gloves slow, fingers red from the cold. "You always ride out when it's this deep?" she asked, folding a dry towel. "Cattle don't stop breathing just because the sky turns white." He glanced at her, the corners of his eyes creased from wind and years. One of the calves was limping. "Ice burn, maybe." I moved her closer to the shed. She set the towel aside. "I'll boil mash for her and bring warm cloth. If we catch it early, she'll keep the hoof." He nodded, then unbuttoned his coat and hung it near the door. "You always know what to do." "I don't," she said. "I just don't like watching anything suffer." He stepped behind her, slid a hand gently around her waist, fingers resting just above her apron tie. "You've made this place feel different." Her hand stilled against the counter. "Different how?" "Lighter. Like it's more than just holding together." She leaned back into him, the weight of his arm grounding. "I used to think that all I could do was hold things together, but here with you, I build things too." He pressed a kiss to her temple, then let her go without a word. That afternoon, Elira walked out to the shed alone, bundled in her wool cloak. The snow reached near to her knees, but she moved through it with quiet purpose. Inside the shed, the calf lay curled in straw, her breath coming slow. Elira crouched, lifting one of the small hooves and running her fingers over the split. She worked in silence, rubbing ointment she'd mixed from tallow and pine tar, whispering soft to the animal though she didn't expect it to understand. Calden found her there half an hour later, crouched beside the calf with her skirts dusted in hay. "You didn't wait for me," he said. She needed hands more than company. He knelt beside her, bringing a blanket from his coat. Together they wrapped the calf and set her near the stove in the barn. The work was done without discussion, practiced now, like the rhythm of a song they both knew by heart. That evening, after supper, Elira brought out the cedar box she'd carried west. She opened it atop the table, revealing a piece of linen, a carved brooch, and a small leather-bound book with corners worn smooth. "I haven't looked through this since before I left Illinois," she said. "Didn't feel like anything in it belonged to who I was becoming." Calden watched her turn the pages, pressed flowers, notations in a hand finer than hers, a charcoal sketch of a house with a wide porch and smoke curling from a chimney. "My mother made that," she said. "When I was little, I told her I'd live in a house like it, one with a porch wide enough for 2 chairs and a garden that came up to the steps." He studied the drawing. "Looks like this one's halfway there." She smiled, though her eyes stayed on the page. "I want to build it, Calden. A porch, a real one, and a garden, not just rows of beans and squash, but flowers too, something that's only for the joy of it." He reached across the table and turned her hand over, pressing his palm to hers. "We'll build it. Come spring, we'll lay the boards ourselves." "You mean that?" I've never meant anything more." Later, she tucked the book away, but not back into the box. She left it on the shelf above the hearth, beside the dried herbs and the tin of matches, a place for things that mattered now. As the weeks passed, the snow deepened, the days shrinking to a narrow band of pale light between long dusks. They spent evenings stitching, carving, preparing for the harder months ahead. Calden fashioned new hinges for the barn door, and Elira mended every blanket in the house until the stitches were barely visible. On the coldest night of December, he lit a second lamp and brought out a small square of folded cloth. She looked up from her quilting, brow raised. "What's that?" he set it before her. "Open it." Inside lay a simple ring, gold softened to a warm sheen with a small garnet set into the band. "My mother's," he said. "She gave it to me before she passed. Said when I found someone who made the house feel like more than four walls, I'd know what to do with it." Elira held it between her fingers, the lamplight catching in the stone. "You're sure?" "I've been sure since you walked back to the fire that first night," hands scraped, eyes steady. She slid the ring onto her finger. It fit without force. "I didn't come west for this," she said, "but I think I was always meant to find it." He stood and offered her his hand. She took it and rose, their fingers laced together like they'd always been that way. They married quietly, just after the thaw began, the snow retreating from the fields in wet rivulets. Calden's nearest neighbor, a cattleman with a wife who kept a Bible in her apron, stood as witness. No dresses were ordered, no music played, just a promise spoken clear beneath the open sky. By April, they'd built the porch. By May, the garden bloomed zinnias and columbine, peas curling up twine and rows of early onions. The calf lived and grew strong, and the ranch held steady through the season. They never left Wyoming. They didn't need to. Years passed. The house expanded, slow and careful, a second room, a wider hearth. Children came, and the porch held them all. Elira taught the youngest to read by oil lamp, and Calden showed the eldest how to ride without looking down. Every winter, when the snow came, they held each other close, and every spring they planted something new. And through it all, they stayed in love, not with noise, but with quiet constancy. With hands held, work shared, and a life built from the ground up, one day after another, exactly as they'd promised.